welcome back to another episode of Over the Glass. I am your host, Jay.
I'm other host Nessa. Today we have another guest, Max Rosenthal. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, how you identify, and how you got into hockey.
Hi, everybody. I'm Max, he, him. For me, it was a story of, I think, just another kind of playoff run, but for the Sabres back in the 90s, growing up in Buffalo as like a 2 or 3 year old kid. Parents never ever watched hockey, but I had a babysitter who really loved the Sabres and just really latched on to Dominic Hasek and his style of goaltending, and maybe didn't start playing goalie for a couple until I was maybe like 9 or 10 as a full time thing. But was a pretty diehard Sabres fan and a little obsessed with hockey, you could say, from a pretty early age, and having to educate my family and other people about what the heck this crazy sport was. But from there, just kept playing youth hockey and ended up going all the way to being like a third string practice goalie for the D1 team in Buffalo. And at least was just a ton of fun to get shots at that level, and have still tried to find ways of being a part of the hockey community going, moving to San Jose or Bay Area about 5 years ago now. Has been a lot of fun to find all the differences and similarities between like Buffalo and Silicon Valley as far as a hockey scene. Definitely a lot of differences there, but no, I feel much more ingrained at this point, 5, 6 years in, and excited to see all the other kind of Bay Area hockey mysteries that lurk around the corner too.
I'm noticing a trend. A lot of our guests happen to be pretty big goalie fans and like love goalies. I don't know what that says about us, like what kind of people we're attracting, but I don't know.
They're
It's kind
so
of cool.
fascinating. They're fascinating creatures.
For as many more like skaters as there are than goalies, every time there's some kind of like hockey admin or a coach or people who just end up like taking on hockey as more than just sort of a pastime. More of them are goalies than seems like should be statistically possible. But whether that's like pucks off the head or just like having to watch the game more than other people, I guess, being all the way at the other end, I think you get a little bit of a different perspective, but also just about as many differences between goalies as there are similarities at the end of the day.
I definitely want to pick your brain about that a little later, but
Go
what I
for it.
do want to
Shoot.
mention is that you are also part of Hockey of Tomorrow. So can you give folks a little insight on what you're doing to get Hockey of Tomorrow out there for the masses?
It's been another thing that feels like a realization of like all the kinds of younger hockey me uh, aspirations of not just kind of playing hockey, but being a part of a bigger discussion of what hockey is and what it could be going forward. And even just from the title of hearing about Hockey Tomorrow later later in the year last year, it felt like the exact right thing for me to keep learning how to get across new messages about ways hockey can be used, not just kind of be the goon sort of sport that it ends up being sometimes, but being able to not only just spend the time working on articulating my thoughts about hockey culture, but being able to actually be in more of a dialogue with people about what they want to see change with what's going on in the hockey world and some things that people want to stay the same. That's all felt like a really great opportunity to keep building on through Hockey Tomorrow.
So you have a couple of articles already posted on the Hockey of Tomorrow website. I was wondering if you could kind of go through one or both real quick for us and kind of summarize your perspective on these topics.
Totally. I think a lot of what I've been writing from has been like my experiences recently, past couple of years of being in the Bay Area hockey scene, and of course that's like taken from some stuff earlier in life. But I think the first article that we got out there was about this Dolores Park. I'm not really sure you can call it a full on roller hockey league, but more just a set of different groups of people that happen to like playing hockey in different forms and have the ability to get over to the multi-sport court they have over there in Dolores Park. And for me, that serves as a really good summary of some of the ways I would want hockey to be in the future and a direction that it could keep growing in, partly just because it isn't really associated with any kind of company or outside entity. It's really just people who like playing and like each other showing up at random times and figuring out how to get pucks and balls and all that stuff together so that we can have more fun that way instead of having to have it be a paid thing or something you have to register through all these other kinds of online forums that can seem like a small thing, but at the end of the day, there are just a lot of people that get discouraged in that process and are like, okay, yeah, I'll just go play soccer or basketball or whatever. That like, yeah, people should do that when hockey puts up those barriers too. But in the end, I think that's a lot of what I want to do with the articles of show really kind of mundane examples of ways hockey does play out all the time and give that a little bit more of a platform to say that this is not only possible but something we can keep building on, and at the same time stuff that does get resistance from more of the sort of entrenched thoughts of the hockey community too.
Yeah, one of the articles that I really resonated with was you talking about the culture kind of like a segregation within locker rooms. I was like traveling around for a while and I ended up on a team where they did separate by genders, and I ended up like I never even saw like the locker room when we have like practice ice time. Like all the men would be like over in one locker room and they'd be like, oh, here's this nice room that we set up for you, and it's like not really a closet, but it has like two stalls, and there was like one other person at the time on the team who wasn't a man, and like she would be in that room, but then she'd be behind a stall, so that it's not like even if I were to try to interact, it's kind of awkward. It doesn't open up the door for conversation. You're not going to get that much engagement just from being on the ice alone.
Totally, and even more so maybe as a goalie, where yeah, for most of the practice or the game, you're just a good distance away from anyone else that you could talk to, and there can feel like there's that
Talking
gap to
to
begin
yourself.
with. Yeah, a little bit of that. Goalies earn their reputation in some ways, but also the situation that the goalies are put into. But regardless, there's just so many ways that you can't really understand what your teammates are thinking, what the coaches are saying, if that's to go through different concrete walls inside the rink, and trying to make up for that gap ends up being more on the responsibility of the players that like don't get to be in the main locker room, and that just creates this cycle where it's really hard to feel like you're a part of the group, and then other people start noticing that and they're like, oh, why are they all off to the side, not really taking account for the fact that, well, the reason that other people have to get pushed out of the locker room is because you happen to be in the identity that lets other people accept you as just like a natural part of that room. And for me, like as a straight cis guy, I always still felt like very on the edge of hockey locker rooms where I'm used to kind of putting up a skin of, okay, I'm going to deal with the things that people say in hockey locker rooms for the next 30 minutes when I go in. And even then, there's some part of it that's like, I need to be a part of that experience to get what the team's about, and hopefully like find that group of people that don't make me cringe quite as much. But yeah, all throughout youth hockey, college hockey, adult league hockey, all the bad stereotypes, all the things you can think you might hear in those rooms get said, and they're way worse when the people saying them think that everyone's the same and that they're all the straight white dudes in the room, and like that's when the real stuff gets said. And I think people can't quite know about that from the outside, and is just another circle that keeps perpetuating itself to the point that you just get that to be what hockey culture is, and hopefully changing that little steps at a time, but it's a lot.
Have you found yourself in a situation where you felt uncomfortable enough to speak up and say something?
Yes, and I think I historically do a pretty bad job of it, of either going at it like too lightly, of trying to make it like a redirection of like, I don't know, someone saying something really bad about homeless people in one of the cities in the Bay Area where there's rinks, and saying like, oh well, like it's more that it's all these rich people taking up all the resources, so we don't like have housing for people, and usually that kind of goes over people's heads. And that I try to find ways of speaking up, but honestly, I've been in locker rooms where there's like codified rules of like how to call out people that seem gay, like as part of a, a system of generating beer funds, even that like just makes it that much harder to think of ways to like constructively change that situation where most of it is just like, yeah, you if you speak out, you're going to be off the team in one way or another. And I have to keep learning how to hone those skills and be better at that in the moment. But a lot of times it just comes up so unexpectedly that it shouldn't be unexpected, but you just think you're in a conversation about something totally different, and then it turns another way, and I have to start backpedaling and figure out what to do. But it's something for me to keep getting better on for sure.
Yeah, like in those situations, like I would hope that, whatever level you're playing at or situation, that there's, like, let's say there's a coach, or let's say there's, like a captain or whatever it is. Like, I would hope that the person that's in that position would be someone who can kind of be the person you go to and be like, hey, so can you help me like move this message along that this is not okay? And that could also be a reason why you feel like, oh, I don't belong in this locker room, or like I don't feel included. Because I've had that experience when I came back to the Bay Area, and I've told this story briefly a number of times before, where the team just really just it wasn't a good team, and I was already on the fence about whether I was going to return next season. And there was something that happened on the bench that kind of like solidified it. Someone said a misogynistic comment. I was sitting right next to him. I was just kind of like frozen in space, and I don't have a friend on this bench, like that to me like doesn't feel very safe.
Yeah, for a situation where, Jay, when you were on that bench and that teammate of yours had said something misogynistic, it's hard to know how you're going to react until you're in that moment, and whether or not you're going to have be in the right headspace to be able to speak up and be like, hey, what you just said is wrong. Like us talking about it here, it's easy to say like, oh, you should have just said something. But it's like, I don't know how you were feeling in that moment. If you're feeling isolated, of course, it's going to be more difficult to speak up. And like with you, Max, I don't know, like what you're going through in those situations. Like you're already uncomfortable because the things that you're hearing are wrong. But like, how do you know you're not going to get kicked off the team like you were talking about, or your teammate is going to retaliate in some way, And so I feel like there needs to be some sort of education or something. I don't know what the answer is, but like people just need to be more mindful that the things they say can hurt people's feelings and cause some damage.
One of the biggest differences I found just through building more into like the coaching side of my hockey career, that it's so much easier when you're in that position to be like, oh no, you can't fucking say that on like this kind of context. And I have so much more difficulty saying those same things in the same kind of situation when I'm the player or like the new guy in particular, that there's a lot of difference in how you can address it based on the sort of power you're given in that situation, and how each individual organization kind of situates you to be able to deal with those problems, where sometimes you do have a really direct route to be able to report what's going on, or maybe not even reporting something, but you have people that you can talk to that are above you that make that whole cycle of trying to get across this really important information about how the players or the coaches or the parents are behaving, that is so much easier to get to when you feel like you're in that position of being a coach and being there to help others, not just to like be on the ice to get better at hockey, which is a fine thing too, but to have people realize as players as well, for me when I'm coaching, to try to help them realize that like they can be those leaders even if they're not given that power right away. It's going to be different than if you're the head of the board or whatever, but still being able to give some of especially the young players, that opportunity to not just have to call out their other teammates, but talk to them about like where where is this coming from? You're saying these really bad things about people with disabilities. Like, what kind of experience have you had in the past with that? Like, being able to share stories and have it be more of an open conversation in the appropriate moments, as opposed to just trying to say, like, no, I'm not going to talk to this person. If you have those kinds of resources that day to be able to feel like you're in the right headspace to have that conversation, I think that's on coaches to make their players feel like they can do that, but also on all the people above coaches to be able to create an environment where that's possible. And those are a lot of moving pieces to actually just start to change, but that's the goal.
I did want to touch on a bit with like your coaching perspective, and then did that kind of influence your, or just you as a goaltender, like your article around various aspects of how the position is so unique from being a skater, from just like the mechanics of it to even like the financial toll.
100%. Where I think still a lot of the coaching philosophies for me come from a more clinical, like, therapy background. I'm much more trained as a therapist than a hockey coach. Maybe I have more training as like playing hockey, but there's really few resources that go into training players to be better coaches. But I think having that kind of mindset of letting the participant, who's ever in therapy, whoever is on the ice, sort of lead the way of where they need to learn more, helps give more shape to how people end up sort of forming their identities along even just different positions. There's definitely a more like archetypal center, wing, defense, and definitely goalies. And I think being able to break down the ways that identity formation kind of comes together ends up helping me not just push players to a certain direction, not just push goalies to play a certain style, but being able to help enhance the things that they're really good at and try to reckon with some of the things that they're still struggling with. I think definitely comes from that kind of social work background, but ends up being a bigger part of the coaching training, and ends up, I think, letting me have more fun myself playing goalie, and being able to kind of take the look after the game's done and get more kind of thoughtful of like, why did I have this reaction after this one kind of goal went in, and like, oh yeah, I can still get totally caught up in the moment, even though I can step aside after and be like, oh yeah, that was kind of silly that I like hit my stick over the crossbar that way. Like, that's not necessarily the way I want to go, but I think giving myself the space to also realize that I'm in the hockey world. Like, I'm not immune to all these other kinds of all these vibes that are floating around, and I think that's something good for me to keep developing on as a player. Like, I still play a lot of adult league and other pickup kinds of things, but even more as a coach. And so I think I'm excited to keep writing more about goalies, because I think there's also a renewed focus from more of like the NHL level, even with just the past couple Lightning Cup runs with Vasilevsky and some other goalies that have really started to carry their team, of people realizing like, oh, maybe these these guys, these people in the net are going to be more important than just kind of one other player on the ice. And I think that can sometimes, I don't want that to turn into like the QB of the NHL, where it's just like all about that one person either. But I think to have a little bit uh, more perspective on all the ways those different roles play an impact on not just the way a game goes, but again, the overall culture of hockey, I think is really, really interesting for me to keep writing about and learning about as I go through all these other games and practices I'm a part of too.
One of the things that stuck out to me in your article, we had Nikki Harnett on a few weeks back, and they talked about like their style is leans more towards like a Dominic Hasek versus like the typical butterfly we see nowadays. And they said that was because they didn't really have like actual goalie training, and they started playing from a very young age, which I found kind of shocking. I mean, from coming from my perspective, I mean, I started playing hockey when I was already aged out of youth. So you're just kind of trying to find mentoring where you can, right? Like, but to hear from a youth perspective that there wasn't really any dedicated goalie training, is that something that you've kind of like seen as very typical?
Even in Buffalo, like when I was growing up, I was in a group of like the kind of local higher level goalies and would be able to go to a lot of extra goalie camps because my dad was like a freelance website designer and would do websites for the different goalie coaches and get a trade that way. And even then, like the most I'd ever see a goalie coach was like once every month during the non-summer months, and then maybe do like two-week camps during the summer, and that was really helpful, but still not something that made it so that I could have like regular check-ins about how am I doing, and there was no ability for those coaches to see like my games or have a lot of the kind of role that you'd want a coach to have of any sport or position. And I think all those issues are even more exaggerated being in the Bay Area, where there are just fewer hockey resources on the whole, and fewer resources, maybe even proportionally, devoted to goalies in other parts of the country, just because there is still kind of that lack of understanding of what goalies' role is on a team. I've heard so many people just say like, "Oh, all you got to do is stop the puck." Overall practices are designed not for goalies, not because coaches are trying to cut them out, but just because the focus is on the biggest group of players on the team. And if you're going to do a drill that is about breakouts, then you want a goalie to be in net to see what's going on, but they're probably not going to get more than like 2 shots over a period of 15 minutes. And a simple sort of logistical reality like that makes it so that it's very difficult to feel like you get the full experience of being a part of the team, having coaching from the perspective as a goalie. And I think all those things just get much worse if you're not like already considered in the higher reaches of like the local white dude goalies, and that for all the expense reasons, all the other kind of demographic reasons, I think it's really intimidating beyond just being difficult to be able to feel comfortable and actually be successful being a goalie. But also none of those barriers are really that much easier playing the other parts of the sport either. It's not like it's super easy to be a defenseman, no matter what. Just that the pressures that goalies face have this little extra twist to the end of them.
But I think in a situation like if you're a forward or you're a defenseman, at least you have your peers to kind of like get you to be better in that position. Like obviously, like a rec league team, you're not gonna have a backup. It's just you. I like had always wanted to play that position, and I knew that it was going to be a lot of money, and if I were to put myself in that situation, like I wanted to have a mentor, because I just don't feel like, at least from my perspective, you can just get out on the ice and just stand in front of the net and figure it out. There's a whole system behind it. And I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Northern California Women's Hockey League in the Bay Area. That's where I got my start playing in net, because they have a pretty good system where they have a dedicated beginners division. They have practices for the bottom 2 divisions where they have mentors, and you're not getting someone who is probably coaching in their 9 to 5. It's just volunteers within the league who are just, you know, a little more skilled in that position, and they're just trying to pass on this knowledge to you. And I just felt like it was so invaluable to get that. And like I'd been playing in co-ed for like nearly like a decade before I just decided to do that, and there was no way in hell you were going to get me to stand in front of the net for my co-ed team. Like there's no way I would have done that. You talking already about a lack of training even at the youth level where you were going to like camps to get that. I mean, obviously that's more money, right? So already the sport is so expensive. Being a goaltender is even more expensive, and now you're going and paying to go to these training camps. I mean, So there's a lot of privilege behind that, right? Have you seen in your experience where areas or organizations are kind of trying to help to lessen that gap between folks who don't have the money to to like essentially engage in the sport and play this role?
Maybe one of the best things I've seen is just a different kind of goalie pad that makes it way easier to have it sort of stay in a communal location, not have it just be in someone's bag, but to have each club have these quick change goalie pads, which are essentially like they look just like goalie pads, but they go over the front of your forward shin pads, so that if you want to play goalie for 10 minutes, you can strap it on like 1 minute and take it off again in the same amount of time and not have it disrupt a whole lot of other parts of practice, as opposed to if you're getting on a full set of goalie gear, it's going to take at least a half hour the first time you do it, and you're probably going to spend a good 15 minutes during that first ice time just adjusting the straps and doing all those kind of things. And if you don't have someone that really knows what they're doing with that equipment, chances are you're not going to have a very good time. And even then, there's a whole bunch of practices. I'll set up kids that have never played goalie before with some new pads, and I'll be watching them, and it's like, oh man, I really messed up the way these are laced. Like, this kid's going to have a tough time today, and a lot of times they do pull through. But it's even little things of just like, where does this strap go? That has a huge difference on a kid's experience with hockey, and it's just so hard to know without having those resources in the form of like just kind of learned experience. And I think that like USA Hockey, I believe, are the ones that put together the quick change gears. But pretty much every NHL club has ways of getting gear to kids, and I think it is more focused on like the forward defense gear. But people are more and more aware that it is tough for goalies to be able to get equipment, and it's actually one of the ways I like to um, try to persuade people that there are these kind of access issues in hockey, where it's a joke to everyone of like, oh yeah, don't teach my kid too much goalie because I'm going to be broke. And you hear that from people of all kind of economic backgrounds, and it's a good entry point to say like, yeah, you're right, it's so crazy expensive to play goalie. Like, if only more people had access to these pads, we'd probably have like better goalies on our team. Like, yeah, we would have better goalies then. Well, let's try to push that forward and make those resources available, especially to kids that may not have that already. Like, yeah, we gotta have a better hockey team, and hopefully I can come back to that person and have like another more deeper conversation about like other ways to want kids to be able to play sports they want, regardless of whether their team's better. It sometimes is a good sort of leverage point to get to know people a little bit better, and also help push them to the point where hockey isn't just like, we're going to make this the best AAA youth organization ever because we want to win.
Do we know why hockey gear is so expensive?
From what I'm told, it's more of like there just aren't very many people who play hockey. Like, even if I surround myself with them, that the amount of soccer cleats that a company can make, and the amount of people that will buy them, makes it so they can just have a lower overhead because they're buying things in larger capacity. And there's really weird parts, I guess, that go into making hockey gear, or at least it's difficult to have factories that reliably like make really good quality gear, where you'll also see a big difference between like the entry level stuff and the more pro model gear. And I think it's also something where people have kind of accepted it. That's like, oh, yep, like goalies, you got to pay more, and maybe you'll get your adult league fees cut off from that. And like, hockey people try to acknowledge that in little ways, but it's always just like, oh, that's nature of business. Like, that's how these things are. Just kind of hope that we can still get a goalie on the ice, and that ends up trickling down to people like me who get 2 or 3 calls a day to sub in for adult league goalies, and that's a lot of fun for me. But it's also like, I could deal with that a little bit less, and that starts with other parts of my jobs helping kids start to learn goalie and have access to that gear. So hopefully 10-20 years down the line, there won't be so desperate a need for subs to play goalie, and that might be a small goal to reach for. But I think that's also part of the simple little logistics of what kind of makes hockey what it is now too.
So, how do you fix a problem where the gear is expensive because not a lot of people play hockey, but not a lot of people are playing hockey because the gear is expensive? It's like this vicious cycle. That's crazy. One thing that actually stood out to me in your article is you mentioning that women's gear is more expensive than men's gear. It's just something I didn't even know.
Yeah, if you can even find like women's specific gear, which isn't
Yeah,
always
I've
guaranteed.
heard of women's gear. I've never actually seen it like at the store.
Really?
Like I don't even know anything about it. But yeah, especially with like goalie gear in general, when I did start subbing for like my co-ed teams or just co-ed in general, yeah, there was an expedite of replacing the secondhand equipment that I was given because those shots are harder. And when you're talking about the difference between beginner to like pro gear, I'm like, yeah, I felt that.
Even just the other day, I got one of the like pro stock, one of the Sharks goalies chest pad, and I've always had like the
Do you
top of
feel
the line.
invincible with that?
Oh yeah, like getting hit with a 100-mile-an-hour slap shot in the stomach just
You're
feels
just
so
like,
good.
do it.
I can't even explain. But I had like a very expensive chest pad before. It just wasn't like the literal model that they give to the pros, and there's a big difference there. And there's maybe like 3 or 4 levels below that. That's what the average person kind of gets when they're getting a chest pad. And especially for something like your chest pad, there's going to be a lot of shots you feel way more and just end up with injury more often if you don't have that top of the line stuff. And then that makes you feel more scared of the shots, less able to be able to feel like you're really into the game, and is just another keep coming back to these vicious loops that come up in hockey. But it's hard to stop once they get going, and I think a lot of it comes down to having pressure from the top to begin with, a desire to change these things, a desire to look at why these issues are the way they are, who benefits from those, but then having everyone else down the line follow in suit. Where that's a lot to ask, but I think that's just kind of how far along the situation is now that you'd need to do all that on all those different levels to really see respectable change coming up.
I wanted to ask you if you had any weird little superstition things that you do in your routine to get ready for a game or something.
I feel like I'm on the less superstitious end, considering I just read some article about how Jack Eichel takes literally 9 showers each day on a game day, and
That's
there's a
excessive.
there's a lot of excessive things in that article, but that kind of took the cake. But for me, I think it's more like I've kind of copying one of the Sabres goalies by doing this, but started before Devin Levi too, their newest rookie goalie, of just making sure that I skate over to the corner during any break where there's like enough time for me to get out there, and I think it kind of loosens me up to not just be like standing in one place for so long, but like helps with eye tracking, just making sure I'm seeing kind of new things around the ice, making sure I'm not just getting into a malaise. Um, Sometimes people kind of get freaked out about that if I'm not in the crease as soon as the face off goes at the other end, but I can be a little bit better at that part too.
So I think maybe we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about the Buffalo Sabres, since that is your childhood team. I saw that they started in 1970s and they don't have a cup. Our condolences.
Makes
They
this
have
final a
not
little
made,
conflicting.
and they have not made the playoffs in the last 12 years. So how does it feel?
I have to fact check this one, but I think they were
Slight
up
shade.
for like the longest playoff drought of any North American pro sports team. Now that the Sacramento Kings got into the playoffs this last year, maybe there's some other contenders at the moment, but the Sabres are at least high up there, and I think it begins with a pretty uh, infamous quote from one of the Sabres uppers about how the only reason for the Sabres' existence is to win the Stanley Cup. And since then, I think that was like about 12 years ago or whatever it was. And I think that is just one of the most Buffalo things that can happen too, where across sports teams, there's such a feeling of what will happen as a Buffalo sports fan, and still sticking with it and just being excited about seeing the plays unfold, whether it's football or hockey, or I guess we're allowed to win lacrosse championships now. But besides that, there's an inevitability about watching Buffalo sports that, for whatever reason, doesn't detract much in like how much I pay attention and like still want Buffalo sports teams to win. But I think it's a very different kind of mindset to coming out to San Jose and like learning more about what Sharks fan culture is like. And yeah, you have some of the most wins of any team the past 20 years, and I think there's a different expectation, even if like the end results might be similar, that I've had to run up against a lot of kind of awkward situations of like, I know my team sucks. Like that's no secret that like I can reach peace with that, and kind of having that same mindset about Sharks things doesn't go well. I need to stop talking about those things for the most part. But I think it's because I also played for, it was like my 6-year-old hockey team where we were the Sharks, and like all the other house league teams were different NHL teams. And since I was 6, the Sharks had been my second favorite team, and so I felt like this kinship to the point where I thought I could talk more openly about those sort of differences between fan bases. And I guess I'm doing it now too, but I've learned to be a little bit more careful the way I deliver that information to.
I don't know a whole lot about the Sabres, but like, what are they doing? And do you feel like they're headed in that direction?
Overall, from Sabres fans and people elsewhere, it feels like this is the best rebuild year in the past like decade and a half of rebuild years. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but
Oh my gosh.
in the end,
Well, no, I'm just thinking, what, it's taken over 10 years. We're in a rebuild right now.
I'm not saying yes, but there's a lot of luck involved, some skill, and sometimes it's just
Little sprinkle of
being
skill.
okay with watching the team and knowing it's not going to be like a Stanley Cup year every time. It's a tough pill to swallow, but I also think that in a kind of jaded way just prepares me for life in a way that being a sports fan for another city couldn't quite. It might even take away some of the mystique if one of the Buffalo sports teams end up winning the championship, because I think there'll be this kind of gap of like, what do we even do now? Like, do we have to expect that they're going to win the next one? I can't really comprehend what that would be like. But yeah, I think it's a lot of patience, and sometimes not. Sometimes you get lucky with quick bounces back. Like I feel like the Devils and Red Wings have had huge dynasties and had a pretty short time to rebuild, and I guess that's to be seen with Detroit still. But it can be a long road, and I think best advice is to enjoy the little things along the way, and know that there's other reasons to watch hockey and follow it from afar.
I'm wondering if you have, like, I don't know, a favorite player, someone that sticks out to you. How do you feel about someone like Alex Tuck being on the team where he's like a homegrown player, basically?
There's a lot of reasons to be more hopeful these next couple of years as a Sabres fan, and sometimes that just means higher expectations to maybe or maybe not come through. But Devin Levi, the goalie I mentioned before, who had his first, like, he's only played 8 games as a Sabre, but there's a lot of high hopes for him. And when I've been talking with other goalie coaches that know what they're talking about, they seem very, very enthusiastic about him just from afar. But even just beyond his play, which has been really impressive, he's just such an out there, like even for goalies, out there in a really, really wholesome way that I kind of hope hockey players can have come through a little bit more, to the point that he, on his the Sabres have like the blue and yellow jerseys, and then they have their black and red ones for their alternate kind of throwback jerseys. And Devin Levi had his blue and yellow mask, but because he only joined the team for the last couple of games of the year, he didn't have his like black and red set up. And so he got this plain black helmet that he decided to color in Sharpie, different like Sabres logos and like lightsabers and Star Wars kind of Buffalo Sabres crossover. And from all my experiences in hockey locker rooms, that's just like the most bold thing that you can do, and that takes a lot of a lot of courage when it shouldn't be something that takes a lot of courage, but just the ability to be like, yeah, I'm gonna draw on my helmet, and who cares what happens after that? I think is some of the wholesomeness that I look forward to in hockey interviews, and a little bit more depth in those ways too. But he seems like someone that'll just be a really fun hockey personality to keep watching grow. Where he's only like 22 or something right now, but that too, his routines of meditating at the hash marks, like facing his net after every TV timeout, to like he'll go a step beyond my waltzes into the corner during a break, where he'll spray his water bottle up into the air to watch the different droplets of water come down as sort of like an eye tracking exercise, which he's not the only one who does that, but there's a commitment to a routine in a way that still doesn't seem like it's so fixed that I don't know. Following droplets of water seems more fun than 9 showers in a day, but to each their own too. I won't judge there. But Alex talked to like the whole having someone that can bring that much energy to their other teammates and the fans is really cool to see, especially because things have been tougher in Buffalo in the past. And you look at players like Jack Eichel, where he would bring that as well, but it was so focused on him alone. Where I know a lot of Sabres fans have different opinions about the Golden Knights right now, but I hope that Eichel continues to do well, and I think it's more just a reflection on you can't have a team that just has the one star, and Eichel has a lot of other good support right now, and that kind of back to the comment of goalies not needing to be the QBs to be like an important part of hockey, that I think people are reckoning much more with the idea that it's a team sport that involves a lot of systems working together, and reducing it to just like one player against one other player might be an easier like uh, uh, kind of message to swallow, but it's just not a very accurate picture of a sport like hockey in particular that's so based on not just luck and randomness, but having people understand where other people are coming from, having communication be such an important part of what happens on the ice, that I think can kind of be glossed over when you get your first round draft pick and you want the whole city to rally around this one player. And in reality, it probably isn't going to work that way. Even if I maybe would have wanted the Sabres to have both Eichel and Tuck, that wouldn't have happened. I think that the teams that are going to find success in the future are going to have at least 5, 6 real stars to be able to make it to the next level. And usually one of those are goalies too. But yeah, there's a lot that I'm excited to see people grappling more with in terms of just ways people see the sport developing as an athletic activity, and kind of the dynamics of what the strategy is, that almost always for me comes back to a bigger sort of cultural social issue going on of often about like how individualist or collectivist are we talking about sports. And I think some of those things are changing too.
So, what is your opinion on Eichel? Were you a fan of him when you guys had him on the Sabres?
He's really good. I just from like a skill level, he's a great player. I think there's more uncertainty of like how he was in the locker room, which for those kinds of things, I don't think you ever really have a very clear sense of how good or bad a player is, where there's always going to be some level of just kind of trying to protect your guys, not having them need to deal with the media quite as much. But no, I think that the way the team was structured with Eichel, it was just too much about him being that one go-to player, and you take away that player and the game's a lot easier from there. And even at the end of the year for the Sabres this year, they had Tage Thompson had the most goals, and he got injured near the end of the year, and we had like a short winning streak that almost got us. We were 1 point away from our first playoff spot in years, and not to blame Thompson at all, but when he came back from his injury was when that winning streak ended, and it seemed like the team shifted more back to that model of like, we're just going to get Thompson the puck and try to hope that works out. And sometimes it does, but I think it's just the consistency that you can get of having not only a deep lineup, but a lineup that you kind of empower those players to make those big time plays all up and down the roster, as opposed to just the people who fill in when Eichel or whatever other star can't be on the ice. I'm hoping the Sabres can continue to play more of that team game. I think whoever it is, even if you don't have injuries involved, you need to have a lot of stars, not just that one.
How many stars would you say they have right now?
Dahlin, the defenseman, hopefully Devin Levi can continue to be like as good as everyone hopes. Tuck, Thompson, you could say we have like other stars that are very young, but they still kind of have to prove themselves at the NHL level. And even if you may need 5 to 6 stars to have that Stanley Cup team, that's not, you need more factors going your way than just that. A lot of that's the coaching, and I think people just have to realize it's also just kind of random luck. Like the playoffs would not play out the same way if you did the same exact thing over again. There's just some degree of it that's to chance, and I think that's why people like it to some degree. Like people love games of chance, and I think hockey relies on that a little bit more. Just having such a funky object like a puck that takes all these different bounces than just a straight up ball. And that is part of what makes it fun as a player to have to adjust to such a chaotic environment. But I think a lot of hockey reporting is more of that retroactive assessment of why something happened, when sometimes it is just like, hey, the puck takes a weird bounce and that dictates a lot of the rest of the game, and you still have to keep working with it from there. But we'll keep seeing how people deal with that.
So on the topic of playoffs, who do you think is going to win the Stanley Cup, and why is it the Panthers?
Because I want them to more. I really do. My partner's from Southern Florida and went to Panthers games as a kid, and it's been really fun to see her whole family kind of like come alive as Panthers fans over the past month or so. And of course, I'm very much attached to that because they didn't really watch hockey before having to deal with me either. But I think all the former Sabres on the Panthers, Vegas may have Eichel, but Reinhart and Montour, and maybe that's it, but still more than Vegas, that makes it so that I think a lot of Buffalo fans are hoping for the Panthers, and I've always been a big Bobrovsky fan too, that if he can keep doing what he's doing, I think he can win the goalie battle against Aiden Hill, but Hill's also been really, really good, and another maybe tough pill for Sharks fans, but it's gonna be, if Panthers are gonna win it, it's gonna be in 7 is my call. But who wouldn't want to see Game 7 Stanley Cup final either?
Yeah. This one's an interesting finals. Like I don't have a horse in the race, as they say, but I don't want either team to win. I wish they could both lose. But fun fact, speaking of Montour, this playoff or this finals, we're gonna have whichever way it goes, we're gonna have an Indigenous player win the cup. So I think that's a cool thing.
Montour, I really wish we kept him too, and he seemed like a really great guy, and yeah, shoulda, woulda, coulda. Congrats both of them.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Since you brought up Hill, and Sharks Twitter has just been
Sharks Twitter
lately. I 1,000% still think the Sharks should have made that trade to Vegas, where defensively the Sharks are not very good, and this gets into the whole can of worms of how people put so much more pressure on the goaltender when it's just like literally there's 5 other guys that let the puck get through to them before it got to the freaking goalie, and like, come on guys. But Hill's just playing on a better team. So what is your opinion about Hill living his best life right now?
As a goalie on an adult league team that went like 1-14 this last season, where we had a couple other goalies, including me, that everyone had like 6.0 goals against average or something around there, it's just hard to get things going if you don't have a team that you can, not only, you don't want them to bail you out every time, but at least have predictable stuff happen. And I think it's really tough to be able to come into that situation as a goalie, kind of knowing that you're just going to get a lot of shots that you don't want to have to see. It's always going to be this weird sort of emergent property of how these teams come together. And yeah, Aiden Hill wouldn't be in the Stanley Cup final right now if he was carrying the Sharks either or the Sabres. Either way,
Well, why not? No.
Yeah, I really like the way Hill plays though. He even if like 6'6" goalies aren't always my favorite, being someone who's like barely 5'10", but yeah, they just look really good right now, and I wouldn't feel too badly as a Sharks fan like having given up Hill. I think that, like you said, probably was the right decision at the time, and hopefully just keep making moves that make it a little bit easier for goalies to come into that situation and do really well. Where, yeah, even if Kakinen and Reimer didn't have the best times either, they're on a different team, different coaching, different whole environment, maybe things are different, but also that kind of shoulda, woulda, coulda / all the chaotic randomness of the hockey world.
I think what's kind of hard for people to accept that Hill's playing really well right now is that, you know, when we traded for him, I think we gave up a 2nd-round pick, and in the trade to Vegas, we only got a 4th-round pick because his numbers weren't great. And so, you know, playing for the Sharks, his numbers, like, we all saw him play. It wasn't great. And the team isn't great, so whatever. I don't blame him. But then now going to Vegas, he's playing like out of his mind, and it's like, why wasn't he playing that well on the team so we could have got something better in return, you know?
Even Bobrovsky though, like he won the Vezina a couple years ago. He has like one of the biggest, highest paid contracts of anybody, and he had a pretty bad regular season. Like, I know injury is definitely a part of that, can't take that away. But at the same time, sometimes goalies just get hot. They get hot with the rest of their team, and you can't fake the energy that goes into the playoffs that some goalies just go into it with. And I think there's a big streak of not just rookie goalies, but goalies that haven't been seen a lot by other teams over the past couple decades that come into the playoffs and just kill it. Like Niemi for Chicago as a rookie, Cam Ward for Carolina when they had their cup, whatever year that was too. I think it's really difficult for teams to be able to research new goalies and their tendencies fast enough to be able to react alongside all the other kind of changes that are going on in playoff series. And I think Hill, even though he's not a rookie, is fulfilling some of that kind of unexpected talent where maybe people knew he was good, but I think it's still hard to be able to know his tendencies and get around that in addition to managing all the other kind of team dynamics that are going on. And I think Hill's exploiting that and just playing really good hockey too.
So without looking at Hill's contract, I feel like the most Vegas thing that will happen is that they will trade him while he's high, get a ton of picks, and then he won't do so well in the next team.
In a very cold, calculating sense, yeah, I, like, Sabres fans would really be on me for this, but if you traded Tage Thompson now, I kind of feel like you would get more return from it than you'll get from like his production over the next couple of years. Would be a very hot take, but in general, I feel like you have that regression to the mean that goes on with all players for the most part, and the chance that you're going to get the same season, 40 plus goals, is probably not that likely, especially when you have the whole rest of the league adapting to a player that's now like the top of the league. I think it's really hard to continue any pace like that. Some guys figure out how to do it, but if you're just purely looking at the most like statistical, logical sense, probably trade, but there's a lot more things that go into it too. You don't want to get rid of your core locker room guys and all those other factors that people bring into it.
Well, in the case of Hill, they have how many goaltenders in their roster right now?
I forget if Lehner's still on, but that's another story.
Yeah, he's on injured reserve
Okay.
at the moment. I think he has still several years left on his contract. But just the way that they've handled their, like, there's no loyalty involved in that franchise. I just kind of see if, like, that would be a logical Vegas move. Like, just get the entire fan base, like, around, like, oh, look how awesome Hill is. And you're like, I see you like this guy.
Get rid of him.
Goodbye. Can't have that here.
They're teaching their fans to not have attachments.
And if he came back to San Jose,
He's not going to
I
play
hope
the
he
same.
does better.
I have hopes, not high hopes, but I have hopes for the Sharks with the upcoming draft. A couple more weeks? A few more weeks.
Yeah, a few more weeks. I think that's all we have for you today. So thanks, Max, for coming on and chatting with us. And do you have any articles that are on the horizon that you want to put out into the world to look forward to?
I do have another one coming up soon that touches a lot more on goalies. Isn't necessarily specific to them, but talks about some Sabres goalies in particular. And I think all the ways that it's really hard to have emotions be a part of playing goalie and all the other positions, and how it's just really hard to get across how you're doing in the hockey world, even just from little interactions in practice. But I think it's definitely going to follow along the lines of a lot of what we already talked about, and just keep building on that goalie fan base we're growing out there.
Yeah.
Maybe you can write an article about Sharks goalies and why they don't do so well. Coaching. Just kidding.
I mean, I do goalie coaching on the side, actually, but we'll see in good time how that pans out too.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Max.
My pleasure. This has been awesome.
All right. And as always, I am your host, Jay.
And I'm Nessa.
Bye.
Thanks again, everyone.